Guards dragged a kitchen servant before the king. She had scrubbed his pots for 18 years. She had never once been allowed near his throne room. Now the whole court had gone silent, watching her walk in. Nobody would tell her why. The king looked at her face, and the color drained from his own, because the daughter he buried 18 years ago had been washing his dishes the entire time, and she was the very last person in that room to find out who she really was. Her name was Nkiru. She was 18 years old. Every morning, before the sun came up, she woke on the cold stone floor of the palace kitchen. She did not have a bed. She had a mat and a thin blanket, and a spot near the biggest cooking pot, because that spot was warm at night. She woke to the same sounds every single day. Roosters far off, the creak of the kitchen door, the first cook already shouting somewhere, even before the sun was up. She fetched water first. 2 trips to the well, heavy buckets, small arms, aching back. Then she lit the fires. Smoke stung her eyes every morning. She had stopped rubbing them years ago. Rubbing only made it worse. Then she peeled the vegetables, a whole basket, every single day. Her fingers knew the work so well she could do it half asleep. Then she scrubbed the pots from the night before, black with soot, until her hands turned raw. The water was always cold. It was never once warm, not in 18 years. She did this every day. She had done it since she was small. Some mornings, before the sun was even fully up, one of the older cooks would already be shouting at her, "Slow girl, lazy girl, move faster." She had heard every version of those words so many times, they no longer even felt like words. They felt like weather, something that simply happened, the way rain happens. On this particular morning, the one this story truly begins on, the chief cook herself was already awake early, pacing the kitchen, in a mood nobody wanted to be near. A noble family was visiting that day. Everything had to be perfect, and when everything has to be perfect, someone in that kitchen always pays for every small thing that is not. Nkiru knew, the moment she saw that pacing, exactly whose morning it was going to be. The other kitchen girls felt it too. They moved quicker than usual, kept their heads down, made themselves as small and as quiet as they could. Everyone in that kitchen had learned the same lesson over the years in their own way. A storm was easier to survive if you gave it nothing to catch hold of. Nobody that morning could have guessed what was actually coming. Not the noble family's visit, not the usual shouting and blame. Something far bigger than any of them, waiting quietly at the edge of an ordinary day, the way the biggest changes in life so often do. She had never once walked into the throne room. She had never once stood close enough to the king to see the color of his eyes. She had seen him from a distance, twice, crossing a courtyard, a tired old man surrounded by guards. She had felt nothing looking at him. Why would she? He was as far from her world as the moon was. She had no way of knowing, on that ordinary smoke-filled morning, that his blood ran in her own veins. She was the lowest person in that whole palace, but she was also the best cook in it. Nobody knew that either, or rather, one man was about to find out. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe so you never miss a story, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? To understand this story, you need to know 2 things that happened 18 years ago. The first thing was a fire. Raiders attacked a small village near the palace border. It happened at night. It happened fast. Houses burned. People ran. The queen was there that night, visiting her sister with her new baby daughter. Guards fought at the village gate. Villagers ran toward the river. Smoke filled the sky so thick that people 2 villages away could see it. By morning, the raiders were gone. So was the queen. The king rode there himself the moment word reached him. He searched the burned houses with his own hands. He searched the riverbank. He searched for 3 full days without sleeping. The queen did not survive. The baby did not either. That is what everyone believed. The king searched 4 weeks after that first terrible ride. He sent guards to every village nearby. He offered gold to anyone with news. He found nothing. No body small enough to be hers. But he found nothing that proved she lived either. So he mourned her as dead, because a king cannot spend forever chasing a ghost. Only one person in that whole palace refused to accept it. Her name was Amaka. She was the palace midwife. She had helped deliver that baby with her own 2 hands. She remembered the baby's first cry. She remembered the queen's tired, happy smile. And she remembered something small, something nobody else remembered, a nurse named Yu, who had also disappeared that night, and whose body was never found either. In the first year, Amaka went to the king herself. "My king," she said, kneeling before him, "the nurse is missing too. Not just the baby. If they died together, we would have found them together. Someone carried her away. Someone is keeping her safe." The king looked at her for a long time. He wanted, more than anything, to believe her. "I have buried enough hope already," he said quietly. "Do not ask me to dig up more of it, only to bury it again." He never asked her to stop believing, but he never asked her to keep looking either. And slowly, year by year, everyone around her stopped listening. "A baby does not vanish without a hand holding her," Amaka used to say, quietly, to anyone who would still listen. And that nurse's hand was holding her. Nobody listened anymore. It had been 18 years. That did not stop women from trying their luck, from time to time, 11 times. Over those 18 years, a woman had come to the palace gate, claiming to be the missing princess. Amaka examined every single one herself. She never once refused. She checked their age, their story, any mark they claimed to carry. Every single time, she found the truth quickly, and every single time, it broke her heart a little more. One woman had been coached by a greedy uncle who hoped for a reward. Another had simply believed her own confused memories. An orphan desperate for a family, meaning no harm at all. Amaka never scolded any of them. She only sent them away gently and went back to her small room, and kept waiting. By the 11th time, even the guards at the gate had stopped bringing the claims to her directly. They handled it themselves now, turning such women away before a word ever reached the old midwife's ears. Nobody thought there would ever be a life in the palace, meanwhile, had simply gone on the way life always does, whether or not old wounds have healed. The market outside the palace gate still filled every morning with traders and noise and the smell of fresh bread. The great halls still hosted feasts and councils. Guards still changed watch at the same hour every single day. And in the middle of it all, quietly, unnoticed, a kitchen kept feeding an entire palace, one meal at a time, without anyone upstairs ever thinking much about the hands that made it happen. The second thing you need to know is about the kitchen. The chief palace cook was a woman named Nena. She had run that kitchen for 20 years. She was proud of it. She was proud of everything she had built. She had taken Nkairu in as a small child from an orphan house near the market, paying a few coins for a servant nobody wanted. Nena liked to remind Nkairu of this often. "You were nothing," she would say. "I gave you a roof. I gave you food. I gave you a place in this world." She said it the way other people say good morning, every single day. And every single day, Nkiru said nothing back. She had learned, a long time ago, that saying anything back only made things worse. Once, when Ayaru was only 10, a visiting noblewoman had praised a stew so highly that she asked to meet the cook. Nena had pushed Nkairu gently but firmly behind her own back, out of sight, before stepping forward with a proud smile. "You are too kind," Nena had said. "It is nothing, truly." Nkairu remembered standing behind her that day, hidden, listening to strangers praise a meal she had made with her own small hands. She was 10 years old. She did not yet understand why it hurt so much. She only knew that it did. She grew used to it, the way a person grows used to almost anything, given enough years. By 15, she barely noticed anymore when her work vanished into someone else's name. By 18, it had simply become the shape of her whole life, the way a river takes the shape of whatever ground it is given to run through. There was one small comfort she allowed herself, and only ever alone, late at night. She liked to imagine, sometimes, that the woman whose voice she half remembered singing to her, the one small, warm memory from before the orphan house, was still out there somewhere, thinking of her too. She never told anyone about that. It felt too fragile to say out loud, like a soap bubble that would pop the moment it met open air. She never once imagined the ground could change. Here is what that kitchen actually looked like, most days. Nkiru cooked. Nena watched. When a dish was good, and Nairo's dishes were always good, Nena carried it out herself, smiling, telling every guard and every servant that Nena, had made it with her own hands. And Kiru scrubbed the pot it came from. That was the whole arrangement. It had never once been different. "You're only fit to scrub pots," Nena told her, in front of the other kitchen girls. "Do not forget that. You will never be more than that." One girl in that kitchen never laughed when Nena said things like that. Her name was Ada. She was Nyairu's age, and poor too, but kind in a way that cost her nothing to be, and she often slipped Nkiru an extra piece of bread when Nena wasn't looking. Ada had come to the kitchen 2 years after Nkiru. She still remembered her first week, crying quietly at night, and Nkiru, only a child herself then, bringing her water without being asked, sitting beside her until the crying stopped. Ada never forgot that. She had spent every year since trying to return the kindness in small walls whenever she safely could. Once, when they were both younger, Nkiru burned her hand badly on a hot pot handle. Nena barely looked at it. "Wrap it and get back to work," she said. It was Ada who wrapped it properly, that night, with a clean strip of cloth she had saved for herself. It was Ada who checked it every day until it healed. "She's wrong about you," Ada whispered once. "Everybody can taste it. Your food is different." "Different is dangerous," Nkiru whispered back. "Dangerous gets you thrown out." She believed that completely. She had no reason not to. There was an order to everything in that kitchen. An order nobody had ever written down, but everyone understood perfectly. The senior cooks ate first from the best of the pot. Then the junior cooks. Then, last of all, whatever remained went to the youngest servants, standing, usually cold by then, usually thin. Nkiru had been last in that line for as long as she could remember. She had stopped minding the cold food years ago. She had never quite stopped minding being last. She used to tell herself, as a small girl, that being last simply meant she got to see everyone else eat well first, and that this, in its own strange way, was its own small kind of happiness. It was a lie she told herself so often that it had almost started to feel true. She had one thing in the whole world that was truly hers: an old apron, faded brown, patched twice, tied at the waist with a bit of rope because the string had worn through years ago. She had worn it every single day since she could remember. She had never once turned it inside out to look closely at the hem. If she had, she would have found small stitches there, a tiny shape. Careful, old, hands-on thread, sewn by a woman who loved her enough to hide something precious in the last place anyone would ever look. But Nkiru never looked. Why would she? It was only a kitchen apron. Once, when she was small, another kitchen girl had grabbed the apron off her, laughing, wanting to try it on. Nkiru had fought to get it back, harder than she fought for almost anything else, though she could never have explained why it mattered so much. Sion Lik now, deep down, that it was hers, and that she could not bear to lose it. She had no idea how right that feeling was. The prince ate in silence. Most nights, he had learned, over the years, that silence at dinner was safest. Speak too much, and every word became a rumor by morning. Speak too little, and people called you cold. Silence, at least, could not be twisted into anything at all. His name was Dyke. He was 26 years old, and he had eaten palace food his whole life, and most of it tasted the way rich food always tastes: fine, but forgettable. He was not a man who complained. He ate what was placed before him, thanked whoever served it, and thought little more about it. Food, to him, had always simply been food. Then one evening, everything changed. A bowl of soup arrived at his table. Simple soup. Nothing special about the bowl, nothing special about the spoon. He took one taste, and he stopped eating. He took a second taste, slower this time, and he set his spoon down completely. He sat there for a moment, almost confused by his own reaction. It was only soup, and yet something about it felt like a memory he could not quite place, warm and honest and made with real care. "Who made this?" he asked the servant, standing by the door. "Chief cook. Nena, my prince." He called for her. She came quickly, smiling, already thanking him before he had said a single word. "Did you make this yourself?" he asked. "With your own hands?" "Every spoonful, my prince." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face did not quite believe her, though he could not yet say why. "It is very good," he said, finally. "Thank you." She left, pleased with herself. He sat there, staring at the empty bowl, and one thought would not leave him alone. That is not the same taste as last week's soup. And that soup was also, apparently, made by her own hands. He told himself he was imagining things. Cooks have good days and bad days, he thought. Everyone does. But a week later, it happened again. This time it was a small dish of roasted yam. Nothing grand at all. Simply peeled and roasted and lightly spiced. He should not have been able to tell the difference. He told the difference anyway, within one bite. "Chief Cook Nena," he said, when she was called before him again. "Did you roast these yams yourself?" "Of course, my prince. With your own hands, from start to finish. Every single one. My prince." He nodded slowly and thanked her, the same way he had the first time. But this time, after she left, he sat very still for a long while, turning something over carefully in his mind. Twice now. The same claim, twice. And twice, something in him simply did not believe it. He began, quietly, to test a third time, choosing his moment carefully. He asked for a particular dish, unusual and difficult, one he suspected Nena herself had never learned to make well. He waited to see what would arrive. What arrived was extraordinary, and when he asked, once more, who had made it, the answer was the same as always. That was the evening he finally stopped asking the chief cook anything at all, and decided, instead, to go and see the kitchen for himself. He began paying attention after that. Quietly, carefully. He did not tell anyone what he was doing, because a prince asking questions about kitchen food would seem foolish to most people in that palace. He started small. He asked the servant, casually, what day it was whenever a truly good meal arrived. He kept the answers in his head. Then later, in a small private notebook he never let anyone see, he noticed a pattern within 2 weeks. Some meals were ordinary, pleasant, but forgettable, exactly like everything he had eaten his whole life. Other meals were different. Every single time, without fail, those meals arrived on days when Nena seemed unusually busy elsewhere, arguing with a merchant, resting after a long morning away from the kitchen entirely. He mentioned it once to a guard, carefully, as though it meant nothing. Does the chief cook often step away from the kitchen? Often enough, my prince. She trusts her girls to manage the small things. Her girls, plural. But there was really only one girl whose food he had never once seen her make in front of him. He began to wonder who was actually cooking on those days. So one evening, instead of waiting in the dining hall, he walked to the kitchen himself. Nobody expected a prince to walk into a kitchen. The whole room went silent, and still the second he stepped through the door, Nena was not there. She had gone to rest. And standing at the fire, stirring a pot, was a thin girl in an old brown apron. Her hair tied back, sweat on her face from the heat. She froze when she saw him. She dropped into a bow so fast she nearly knocked over the pot. "My prince!" "Forgive me. I did not know you would. What is your name?" "Enkairu." "My prince. Are you the one who made last night's soup?" Her whole body went still. This was the moment she understood instantly, when the wrong answer could end everything. She had 2 choices, and only a second to choose. She could lie and say, Nena made it, and stay safe. Or she could tell the truth and risk everything. "Yes, my prince," she said quietly. "I did." He studied her for a long moment. "And the roast chicken, 3 nights ago, the one with the strange, sweet sauce nobody could name, was that you as well?" "Yes, my prince." "Why does the chief cook take credit for your food?" And Kiru looked down at the floor. She had never been asked that question out loud before. She had thought it many nights, alone on her mat. But nobody had ever asked it to her face. "Because I am a servant," she said, "and she is the chief cook. That is simply how it works, my prince." He did not answer right away. He looked around that kitchen, at the smoke-stained walls, at the girl's raw and reddened hands, at the small hard mat in the corner where she clearly slept. "That is not how it should work," he said finally. He looked at the raw skin on her hands, the small burns and old scars there from years at the fire, and something in his expression tightened, though he kept his voice gentle. "Does she ever say thank you? Even once?" And Kairu almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. "No, my prince, not once." "Does anyone?" She thought about it honestly. Ada, sometimes, in her own quiet way. But no one else. Not in 18 years. "Not really," she admitted. Something in his face changed at that. Not pity. Exactly. Something closer to quiet anger, though he kept it carefully out of his voice. Tena left before Nena returned, before anyone could see how long he had stayed. Nkairu stood alone by the fire for a long time after he left, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. She did not know it yet, but that short conversation had just set 18 years of buried truth into motion. If you are already hoping the truth comes out, if you already want this girl to be seen, then do me one small favor before we continue. Tap the like button, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Because in this story, a truth is coming that nobody in that palace is ready for, not even the girl it belongs to. The prince began visiting the kitchen often after that. Never announced. Never at the same time twice. He would simply appear, watch quietly from the doorway, and ask a few questions before leaving. Nena noticed. Of course, a prince does not visit a kitchen without the chief cook noticing. At first, it frightened her. Then, slowly, it made her angry. She could not explain the anger to herself. Not honestly. If she had been honest, she would have said, "He is looking at the girl, not at me, and I built this kitchen, not her." But she did not say that, even to herself. Instead, she found other reasons to be angry, and she aimed all of them at Nkiru. The work grew harder. Longer hours, fewer breaks. If Nkiru made a small mistake, a pot left too long, a vegetable cut unevenly, Nena made sure the whole kitchen heard about it. "Careless girl," she would say. "This is what happens when you give someone too much freedom. I should never have let the prince notice you at all." She added new chores that served no purpose except to tire Nkiru out, carrying stones for a wall that did not need repairing, sweeping a courtyard twice in one day. Small, pointless tasks, each one designed to remind Nkiru exactly who was still in charge. The worst of it came on the day a noble family visited for a formal dinner. Nena, nervous and eager to impress, had Nkiru cooked nearly the entire meal, then made her stand at the back of the hall, in full view of the guests, simply to point at her. "This one carries the water for my finest dishes," Nena told the visiting lord proudly, as though Nkiru were a piece of kitchen equipment rather than a person. A useful pair of hands, nothing more. Nkiru stood there, in front of strangers, feeling smaller than she had felt in years. She caught the prince's eye across the hall. He was not smiling. He was watching Nena with an expression Nairu had never seen on him before, cold and unreadable, and for once she was almost glad someone else was angry on her behalf, because she had long since run out of anger of her own to spend on it. Nkiru said nothing back. She never did, but something in her had begun, quietly, to change. A small flicker, buried deep, that had not been there before. For the first time in her life, someone important had looked at her and said, "That is not how it should work." She could not stop thinking about it. The prince kept visiting, week after week, and slowly, without either of them quite deciding it, those visits stopped being about food at all. He asked her questions nobody in that palace had ever asked her. What she liked to cook, and why. What she dreamed about. On the rare nights she let herself dream. Whether she had ever wanted to leave that kitchen, just once, and see something else. "Where would I go?" she asked him once, Honestly, this kitchen is the only world I know. Everyone deserves to know more than one world, he said. She had never heard anyone say something like that to her before. She turned it over in her mind for days afterward, the way she once turned over a new spice, testing it slowly, deciding whether she trusted the taste of it. One evening he brought her something small, wrapped in plain cloth, a single orange, sweet and rare, the kind that came from far south and cost more than she earned in a month. I have never had one, she admitted, turning it over in her hands. Then that is a mistake we should fix immediately, he said, and sat down on the low stool to watch her try it, as pleased by her surprise as if he had grown the fruit himself. It was such a small thing. An orange, nothing more. But Nairu kept the peel for weeks afterward, dried and pressed flat between two stones, because nobody in 18 years had ever once brought her something simply because they thought she might enjoy it, with nothing asked for in return. She began, without meaning to, watching for him, listening for his footsteps. In the evening, she told herself it meant nothing. She was not sure she believed herself. Ada noticed, before Naikiru admitted it to herself. You smile more. On the evenings he comes, Ada said one night. Not unkindly. I do not. You do. I have watched you smile at a pot of soup more warmly than most people smile at their own children. And Kairu threw a scrap of cloth at her, laughing despite herself, and did not deny it again. They fell into a small, quiet game over those weeks, one neither of them ever named out loud. He would try to guess, before tasting, whether a dish was hers or Nena's. He was right almost every time. When he was wrong, he laughed at himself, and then Kairu found she liked the sound of that laugh more than she probably should have. You cheat, he told her once, only half joking. You cooked too well. It gives you away every time. That is not cheating, my prince. That is simply cooking. Then I have never once met a fair cook in my whole life, because none of them ever gave themselves away like you do. She smiled at that. A real smile, one of the first she had allowed herself in a very long time. He noticed the smile too, and something in his own chest seemed to settle a little more firmly each time he saw it, though he could not yet have named what exactly that feeling was. One evening, the prince stayed longer than usual. He watched her work in silence for almost an hour, then finally spoke. You cook like someone who was taught, he said, not like someone who simply learned by doing. There is a difference. I have eaten food from 100 kitchens, and I know the difference. Nobody taught me, my prince. I only tried things until they tasted right. That is not how most people learn to cook this well. Most people need a teacher. She shrugged, uncomfortable under the question. Then I suppose I am not most people. He almost smiled at that. Almost. Where did you come from before this kitchen? An orphan house. Chief cook. Nena brought me here when I was small. I do not remember much before that. Nothing at all. And Kiru thought about it, really thought. The way she rarely allowed herself to. Only small things, she said slowly. A smell of smoke. A woman's voice, singing something I cannot remember the words to. And this. She touched the apron at her waist, without thinking. I have had this apron since before I can remember anything else. Nina says it came with me from the orphan house. The prince looked at the apron for a long moment. He said nothing more that night, but something about the way he looked at it stayed with Enkairu long after he had gone. That night, alone on her mat, she found herself thinking about the smell of smoke again, more than she had in years. She did not know why it came to her so often, only that it always left her feeling strangely uneasy, as though her own mind were trying to hand her something she was not yet ready to hold. She still did not think to turn the apron inside out. Not yet. Word travels fast in a palace, even when people try to keep it quiet. Within a month, half the palace staff knew the prince had taken a strange interest in the kitchen. Guesses spread. Some said he simply loved good food. Some said something else entirely, something they whispered rather than said out loud. Nena heard every version of every rumor. Each one made her more afraid. She made a decision, one planned carefully over several days, rather than made in a sudden temper. She began keeping Nikiru away from the kitchen on the days she guessed the prince might visit. Extra errands, trips to the farm market, anything that would put distance between them. It worked, for a while. The prince came, found ordinary food, and no explanation for the extraordinary meals he remembered, and left disappointed each time. One evening, Nena's fear tipped over into something worse than fear. She had found Enkiru's apron drying on its usual hook, and something about the sight of it, worn so thin now, so plainly a servant's rag, made her suddenly, unreasonably furious. She snatched it down. "This filthy thing," she said, "always in the way. I should burn it and be done with it." She actually walked toward the fire with it in her hand. Ada, who happened to be nearby, grabbed her arm before she could throw it in. "Chief cook, please. It is only cloth. It costs nothing to let her keep it." Nena stood there a moment, breathing hard, gripping the old apron so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Then, just as suddenly as the anger had come, it seemed to leave her. "Take it!" "Then," she snapped, throwing it at Ada's feet. "I do not care." Ada returned it to Enkiru that night without telling her how close it had come to the flames. Some fears, she decided, were not worth passing on. Nobody in that kitchen understood, in that moment, exactly what had almost been lost forever. Even that was not enough for Nena's growing fear. She began asking around, quietly, about a distant palace estate 2 days' ride away. A smaller kitchen, always short on hands, always willing to take a servant off another cook's hands. She had almost finished arranging it. Enkiru would simply be gone one morning, sent away before anyone thought to ask questions, far beyond any prince's easy reach. It had not come from nowhere. A few days earlier, Enkiru had finally worked up the courage to ask Nena a question she had carried inside her for years. "Chief cook," she said, carefully, while they worked side by side at the fire, "do you know anything more about where I came from? Before the orphan house." Nena's hands went still over the pot for just a moment. Then she continued stirring, as though nothing at all had happened. "Why do you ask such a thing now?" "I do not know. I have simply been wondering, more than usual. Lately, there is nothing to know," Nena said, too flatly. "Too fast? An orphan is an orphan. No family wanted you. That is the whole of it. Do not waste your mind chasing shadows that were never there to begin with." Something in her voice, sharp and final, told Enkiru not to ask again. But it also told her, in a way she could not quite explain, that there was more behind the answer than Nena wanted her to see. It was the very next day that Nena began quietly asking around about the distant estate. Ada found out first, by accident, overhearing Nena speaking with a messenger in the storeroom. She told Enkiru that same night, her voice low and frightened, "She means to send you away. Before the week is out." Enkiru felt the floor tilt beneath her. "Away? Where?" "Somewhere far, somewhere he will never think to look." For the first time in her whole life, Enkiru understood what it meant to be truly afraid of losing something. Not food, not safety, but a small, fragile hope she had only just allowed herself to feel. That same night, Nena called her in front of the other kitchen girls one final time, as though sensing, somehow, that her hold on the girl was slipping. "You think a prince's kindness means something?" Nena said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Princes are kind to servants the way a child is kind to a stray dog. It feels good for a season. Then the season ends, and the dog is left exactly where it started, hungry and alone, and foolish for ever believing otherwise." Some of the other girls looked away, embarrassed. Ada's jaw tightened, though she said nothing this time. Enkiru said nothing either. But that night, lying on her mat, the words settled into her chest like small stones, heavy and cold, and she found herself wondering, despite everything, whether Nena might actually be right. She did not know what to do. She could not go to the prince herself. A kitchen girl did not simply walk up to a prince's chambers uninvited. She could not refuse Nena outright. A servant did not refuse the chief cook. So she did the only thing she could think to do. She waited, and she hoped, and she prayed the prince would come to the kitchen one more time before it was too late. Then, one evening, it seemed the whole problem had solved itself in Nena's favor. The prince stopped coming to the kitchen at all. A full week passed. Then, two. Nena relaxed, believing her plan no longer even needed to be rushed. She told herself she had solved the problem. She told the other cooks proudly that the prince's strange little curiosity had finally faded, the way these things always did. She set the date for Enkiro's transfer, regardless, quietly, for the following morning, wanting the matter finished before anything could change again. She was wrong about all of it, and she found out exactly how wrong 4 days later. The prince had not lost interest. He had simply changed his method. Instead of visiting the kitchen, he had gone to the one person in that palace who remembered everything that had ever happened in it. The old midwife, Amaka. He found her sitting outside her small room, as she often did in the evenings, watching the sky. "I need to ask you something strange," he said, sitting beside her. 18 years ago, the night the queen and the baby were lost. Do you remember it clearly? Amaka's whole face changed. Nobody had asked her about that night in years. "I remember every single hour of it," she said quietly. "Why do you ask?" "My prince, there is a girl in the kitchen." "A servant. Nena says she came from an orphan house as a small child, but nobody seems to know where she came from before that. She cooks like no one I have ever tasted, and she has an old apron she has worn her whole life, with no memory of where it came from." Amaka went very still. "How old is this girl?" 18, I believe." The old midwife's hands began, very slightly, to shake. "Take me to her," she said. "Now." Tonight, neither of them knew it yet, but they had arrived with barely a night to spare. Enkiru's transfer to the distant estate had been set for the very next morning. The two of them walked to the kitchen together, quickly, saying almost nothing the whole way. They found Enkiru alone there, hanging her apron on a hook to dry after a long day. The fire was low. The other girls had already gone to sleep. She hummed quietly to herself, a small habit she had never noticed she had. The prince stood back in the doorway. Amaka walked forward slowly, her old eyes fixed on the faded brown cloth, swaying gently from the hook. "May I see that?" she asked, her voice unsteady. Enkiru turned, startled, then confused at the sight of a stranger's face so full of feeling. "Of course," she said, and handed it over, not understanding why her own hands had begun to tremble slightly too. Amaka turned it over in her hands. Once, twice. Her fingers moved to the inside hem, the part nobody ever looked at, the part meant to be hidden. She had to look twice before she trusted her own eyes, and there, small and careful, sewn by a mother's hand 18 years ago, was a tiny embroidered symbol. The royal symbol, the one only ever stitched into clothing made for the king's own children. Amaka's legs gave out beneath her. The prince caught her before she hit the floor. "What is it?" Enkiru asked. Frightened now. "What did you find?" Amaka looked up at her with tears already falling. "My child," she whispered, "I delivered you into this world with my own 2 hands. I have looked for you for 18 years. This was the moment the whole story had been carrying, and now it was here." For a long moment, nobody in that kitchen moved. Even the fire seemed quieter than usual, as though it too were waiting to hear what came next. Nayuro did not understand, not at first. "I do not know what you mean," she said. "I am a kitchen servant." "You are the king's daughter," Amaka said. "You were born in this palace. Your mother stitched that symbol into that apron with her own hands, days before she died, because some part of her already feared what was coming." The kitchen had gone completely silent. Every servant in that room had stopped moving. "That cannot be true," Enkiru whispered. "It is true," Amaka said. "I have waited 18 years to say it." By now, drawn by the strange stillness, other kitchen girls had crept to the doorway to see what was happening. Ada pushed through them and came to stand close beside Enkiru, taking her hand without a word. Nena, who had just walked in carrying a tray, dropped it shattered on the stone floor. Nobody looked at the broken plates. Every eye in that room was fixed on the apron in Amaka's shaking hands. "That is impossible," Nena said, too quickly, too loudly. "That girl came from an orphan house. I have the records. I paid for her myself." "Show them to me," said Amaka. "They are old, difficult to find. It will take time." "Then we will take the time," said the prince, stepping fully into the room now. Every record, every scrap of paper about where this girl came from. Tonight, if it exists, Nenna's face had gone pale, genuinely pale, for the first time anyone in that kitchen had ever seen. "Chief Cook," said Ida quietly, still holding Enkiru's hand, "if there is nothing to hide, then there is nothing to fear in showing them." It was the first time, in all her years in that kitchen, that Ada had ever spoken back to Nenna. Nenna looked at her, and said nothing at all, because for once she had no sharp words ready. The search began that same hour. Guards went to Nenna's room while she stood, silent and shaking, in the middle of the kitchen. Enkiru waited too, though her whole body felt strange, as though none of this could truly be happening to her. The room was small and plain, much like Nenna herself had always presented to the world. A mat, a stool, a small shelf of cooking tools she treasured more than anything else she owned. At first, the guards found nothing at all, and for one terrible moment, Enkiru wondered if the truth might simply stay buried forever, lost somewhere between one frightened woman's silence and 18 years of dust. Then one guard knelt and reached far beneath the low bed, further than seemed possible, and his hand struck something solid, a locked chest pushed deep against the wall, covered in years of dust so thick it looked almost like part of the floor itself. They had no key. Nenna, when asked, claimed she had lost it years ago, though her eyes did not quite meet anyone's when she said it. In the end, the prince himself broke the lock, impatient after 18 years of waiting that were not even his own to have waited. Inside were old papers, a small bag of coins she had never spent, and a single scrap of plain brown cloth, folded carefully, kept for 18 years. The papers told a story Nenna had never once shared with anyone. 18 years ago, a woman had come to her kitchen door in the middle of the night, badly hurt, carrying a baby wrapped in a plain brown cloth. The woman begged for shelter. She said only one thing before she collapsed, that the baby must never be given back to the palace, that it was not safe there, that someone had tried to kill her. She died within 2 days. Nenna never learned her name. Nenna kept the baby, not out of cruelty at first, out of caution, and then, slowly, out of something else entirely. Because within that same year, rumors reached the palace kitchen of a reward offered by the grieving king for any information about his missing daughter. A large reward, large enough to change a poor cook's entire life. Nenna suspected, even then, what she might be holding. She never came forward. She told herself, at first, that it was too dangerous, that the same people who had hurt the mother might come for the child too. But the years passed, and the danger she spoke of never came. And still she said nothing, because a servant girl who could cook like an angel and ask for nothing in return was worth more to her, quietly, than any reward ever could be. "You knew," Nairu said, standing in the middle of that kitchen, her voice breaking for the first time in the entire story. "All these years, you knew, and you let me sleep on this floor." Nenna could not answer. There was no answer that would not condemn her completely. "I did what was necessary," she said finally, weakly. "I kept you safe. I fed you. I gave you a home." "A home," Enkiru repeated. The word tasted strange in her mouth. Suddenly, after everything, was it a home, chief cook, or was it a cage you were paid to guard? Only nobody ever paid you, because you never told anyone there was anything worth paying for. Nenna flinched, as though the words had struck her harder than any hand could have. "I was afraid," she said quietly. "At first, truly afraid. Someone had hurt that poor woman badly enough to kill her. I did not know who or why. I did not know if they were still looking. I told myself I was protecting you. You could have told the king that much. At least, let him decide what danger looked like. That was never your choice to make alone. A cook does not walk into a throne room with a stolen princess and a story about fear," Nenna said. "I would have been executed before I finished the first sentence. That fear, at least, was real. Whatever else was not. And the reward you never claimed." Enkiru pressed, "The one you have just admitted you knew about, every single year, while you kept me scrubbing your pots. Was that fear too, chief cook? Or was that simply greed, wearing fear's clothes?" Nenna had no answer for that one either. And later, Once the fear was gone, once years had passed, and no danger ever came, Nena had no answer for that one at all. The silence stretched on, long and terrible, until even Ada looked away, unable to watch it any longer. "You gave me a floor," said Enkiru finally, "and you took everything I ever made and called it your own." That night, Enkiru could not sleep. She lay on her old mat, in her old spot near the biggest pot, because nobody had told her yet where else she was supposed to sleep. Everything around her looked the same, but nothing felt the same. A small, frightened voice inside her kept whispering the same question over and over. What if this is a mistake? What if they change their minds tomorrow and send me back to scrubbing pots, and everyone remembers forever that I once believed I was a princess? 11 women before her had believed it too. 11 women had been wrong. She almost got up and left that night. She almost walked out the kitchen door, back into the world she understood, where at least the pain was familiar. It was Ada who found her sitting by the door, still in her old apron, staring out at the dark courtyard. "You are not running away," Ada said quietly, sitting beside her. "Not from this." "What if it is not true, Ada? What if I let myself hope? And then you will still be the same girl who cooked the best food in this whole palace," Ada said. "Princess or not, that part was never going to change, whatever they find out tomorrow." Enkiru said nothing for a long while, but she did not get up and leave either. She stayed until morning. The king did not believe it. Not right away. He had good reason not to. In 18 years, 11 different women had come forward claiming to be his lost daughter. Every single one had been proven false. Some had been cruel, hopeful liars. Some had simply been confused. None had been real. Each time, he had let himself hope. Just a little. Each time, the hope had been taken from him again. "Bring her to me," Tekin sighed, when the prince told him everything. "But bring proof, not hope. I have buried hope for this before. I will not do it again without certainty." So an investigation began. A real one. Careful and slow. Exactly the kind that takes time. Old palace guards were questioned about that night, 18 years ago. One old guard, a man named Chuka, who had served the palace since he was young, remembered it. Clearest of all. "I remember a nurse named Yuju," he said, standing before the king. "She was running when the houses were already burning. Something small was wrapped tight against her chest. I called out to her, asked if she needed help. She did not stop. She only ran faster, toward the market road, away from the palace, as if the palace itself was the danger." "Toward the market road," the king repeated slowly, "where the orphan house stands." "Yes, my king, exactly there." A second guard, older still, added something no one had ever thought to ask him before. "I saw the nurse earlier that same night, my king, before the fire started. She came to me, frightened, and said something strange. She said the queen had told her, if anything ever happened, to take the baby far from the palace, not toward. She said the queen feared someone close to the throne itself, though she never named who. I thought it was only fear talking. I did not report it. I have carried that silence a long time." The hall went very quiet at that. The king's face had gone pale. "Someone close to the throne," he repeated softly. "She feared one of our own." He did not finish the thought aloud. He ordered a quiet inquiry into it that same week, and it turned up nothing solid in the end. Only an old, tired rumor about a distant cousin who had once wanted the throne and had died himself, years ago in a hunting accident far from the palace. The king let the matter rest there. Some fears, he decided, belonged only to a frightened new mother on the worst night of her life, and did not need to be chased any further than that. What mattered, in the end, was not who else might have wished harm on that family 18 years ago. What mattered was the daughter who had survived it, standing in his hall today, very much alive. Guards were sent to the orphan house itself that same day. The old records there were thin and poorly kept, but one line, faded and nearly unreadable, still said enough. A baby girl, unnamed, brought in the night of the fire by a woman too weak to give her own name, given over 3 days later to a palace cook seeking a servant. It matched everything else, piece by piece, like the final stone dropped into a wall that had been missing it for 18 years. The king read that line 3 times before he could make himself believe it. The apron itself was examined by the same royal seamstress who had originally trained under the queen's own dressmaker. She was an old woman now, her eyes not what they once were, but her fingers still knew fine work when they touched it. She confirmed it without hesitation. That stitch, that thread, that exact symbol, it had only ever been used for one purpose in the history of that palace. Royal children, and only royal children. I would know this stitch anywhere. My king, she said. I taught it to the queen myself, the year before your daughter was born. She practiced it for months. She wanted to sew something for her baby with her own hands. She held the apron up gently, almost reverently, for the whole hall to see. Most mothers in her position would have ordered fine silk gowns, embroidered by the palace's best hands. She asked instead for the plainest cloth I had, and she stitched this symbol into it herself, badly at first, then better each time she tried. She told me once that she wanted her daughter to have one thing in this world that was made only from love, and nothing else. Not gold, not status, only love. The hall was utterly silent by the time she finished speaking. Piece by piece, the truth locked into place, the way a key finally turns after 18 years, stuck in a rusted lock. The king sat with all of it for a long while, saying nothing, his hands folded tightly together, as if holding on to something that might slip away if he let go too soon. But not everyone at court was ready to accept it, so Isel, one noblewoman, a sharp-tongued woman named Lady Chidinma, had been among the 11 who once claimed to be the missing princess herself years earlier, before she married into the court and quietly buried that embarrassing chapter of her life. When she heard the news of a new claimant, a mere kitchen servant, no less, old wounds opened fast. She stood up in open court, in front of the king, in front of everyone. "My king, forgive me," she said, "but I once stood exactly where this girl stands, certain of my own story, only to be proven wrong. How can we be certain this is any different? A stitched symbol can be copied. A story can be taught to a clever girl by a guilty cook eager to save her own neck, and a prince too smitten to see clearly." A ripple of unease moved through the hall. Even the king's face tightened. "You dare suggest my son has been fooled?" The king said, "I dare suggest, my king, that hope has fooled wiser men than a prince before now." The king turned to Amaka. "Is there anything more certain than cloth and stitching? Anything only you, and no one else, could know?" Amaka thought for a long moment. Then her old face changed. "There is one thing," she said slowly. "A birthmark, small, shaped like a crescent moon, on the inside of her left ankle. I remember it because I remarked on it the very hour she was born. I told the queen it looked like a tiny moon had chosen to rest on her daughter's skin." Every eye in that hall turned to Nick. She had never once, in 18 years, thought to examine her own ankle. Slowly, her hands shaking, she knelt down and pulled back the edge of her worn sandal. There it was. Small, pale, shaped exactly like a crescent moon. Lady Chidinma said nothing more. She sat down, quietly, and did not speak again for the rest of that day. The king asked to see her alone. She walked into the throne room for the first time in her life. She had imagined it sometimes, in quiet moments. Tall walls, cold stone, a room built to make small people feel smaller. It was not like that at all. It was simply a room, a large one, with good light, and an old man sitting quietly at the far end of it, looking more nervous than any king should look. And Kiru stood before him in the same kitchen apron she had always worn, because it was the only thing she owned, and because some part of her could not yet bring herself to take it off. The king was an old man now, tired in ways that had nothing to do with age. He looked at her for a long, long time before he spoke. "You have her eyes," he said quietly, "your mother's eyes. I would know them anywhere." "I do not remember her," Naikiru said. "I do not remember any of this. I only remember a kitchen." "That is not your fault," the king said. "That is mine. I stopped looking for you too soon." "You looked for weeks," Enkiru said. "The records said the king repeated softly, as if the word itself embarrassed him. "You were out there for 18 years. I gave you weeks. And then I gave you a grave with no body in it, because a grave was easier to carry than 18 years of not knowing." He shook his head slowly. "Amaka never stopped." "I did. I have had a long time to be ashamed of that." There was a short pause before Nairu finally found the courage to ask the question that had been sitting in her chest since the moment Amaka first spoke her mother's name. "What was she like?" And Kairu asked quietly. "My mother." The king's whole face softened, the way an old man's face softens only for the memory of someone truly loved. "Stubborn," he said, and almost laughed. "Kind, but stubborn. She insisted on sewing that apron symbol herself, though the royal seamstress offered to do it for her a dozen times. She said a mother's hands should be the ones to protect her child, not a servant's, however skilled. I did not understand it then. I understand it now." And Kairu looked down at the worn apron in her hands, seeing it, for the first time, not as an old rag, but as the last thing her mother's hands had ever made for her. She was right. Then Kiru said softly, "It did protect me, just not the way she meant." He reached out, slowly, and took her hand, the same hand that had scrubbed 1,000 pots, that had carried water before sunrise for 18 straight years, that had cooked meals fit for kings while sleeping on cold stone floors. He held it the way a father holds a child he thought he had lost forever. "Welcome home," he said, and his voice broke completely on the last word. "Welcome home, my daughter." Bar began to cry, not the careful, silent crying she had trained herself to do her whole life, but real crying, the kind she had never once allowed herself in that kitchen, because crying there had always cost too much. Here, finally, it cost her nothing at all. If this story is moving you, subscribe now, because what happens to Nena and what Nkiru chooses to do with a kingdom that never once saw her will change how you see this whole story. Nena was brought before the king 3 days later. The great hall was full that morning. News like this does not stay quiet in a palace, and every noble, every guard, every servant who could find a reason to be present had found one. The whole court expected her to be punished harshly. Some expected worse than that. A woman who hides a princess for 18 years for her own gain is not usually shown mercy. Nena herself seemed to expect it too. She knelt before the king with the stillness of someone who has already accepted the worst. The king surprised them all. "You kept my daughter alive," he said. "Even if you did it for the wrong reasons, I will not pretend that counts for nothing, however small a thing it is beside everything you took from her." A murmur went through the hall. Nobody had expected those words. Nena, kneeling on the floor, did not lift her head. "You will lose your position as chief cook," the king continued. "That title, and everything that came with it, belonged to skill. It seems you never truly had. It belonged to my daughter's hands. From today, it will finally be given to her." "What punishment, my king?" Nena asked, her voice small for the first time in the story. "You will work in that same kitchen," said the king, "under her, for as long as she wishes it. You will learn every single day what it feels like to be beneath someone whose work you once stole. That is not cruelty. That is simply the truth, finally placed where it belongs." Nena's shoulders shook. Once, though whether from relief or shame, nobody in that hall could say for certain. Nkiru stood at the side of the throne, watching all of this. She had expected to feel something fierce when this moment finally came. Instead, she felt something quieter, harder to name. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something close to it, waiting patiently at the edge of her heart for the day it might be ready. She had thought many times over those 3 days about asking the king for something harsher. Some part of her, the part that had scrubbed 1,000 pots in silence, believed she was owed that much. By standing there, watching Nena kneel in front of the whole court, small and exposed in a way, Nkiru had once been every single day of her life, she found she did not want to hand that feeling on to anyone else. Cruelty repaid with cruelty only ever made to people small, she decided. She would rather be the one who stayed whole. 1 year passed. The palace kitchen looked almost the same. Same stone walls, same great cooking pots, same smell of smoke and spice in the evening air. But everything about it had changed. Ankairu no longer slept on the floor. She had her own room now, close to the kitchen, because she refused to move far from the place where she had found her own strength. Even after learning who she truly was, she still cooked, most days, with her own 2 hands. Not because she had to anymore. Because she loved it, and because a princess, she had decided, could still hold a spoon. Ada, her only real friend through all those hard years, now ran the kitchen's daily work. At Enkairo's side, trusted completely, paid fairly for the first time in her life. Enkiru made certain of that, personally, in her very first week as princess. It was the first order she ever gave. There was a new rule in that kitchen, too. One Naikiru had asked for herself. Every servant girl now learned to read a little, and write a little, and count her own wages, so that no one could ever again quietly take credit for work that was not theirs. It was a small rule. It changed almost everything for the girls who came after her. She made one more rule, too, smaller than the first, but just as important to her. Every servant in that kitchen, no matter how young or how new, was given a proper bed before winter came, and a full share of whatever meal they had helped prepare. No one, ever again, would eat what was left standing up, the way she once had, for 80 long years. "It costs so little," she told Dyke once, when he asked why such a small thing mattered so much to her. "It costs so little, and it means so much. I would have given anything, once, for someone to notice that." "I noticed," he said quietly. "Eventually." "Eventually," she agreed, and took his hand. "Eventually is enough, if it comes with the truth behind it." He squeezed her hand gently, and neither of them said anything more about it. Some understandings, they had both learned, needed no further words at all. Nina was still there too, exactly as the king had ordered. She worked quietly now. She had stopped giving orders a long time ago. Some days, Nairu caught her watching from a corner, and something in the old cook's face looked almost like shame, worn down slowly by a year of humble, honest work. One evening, Nina made a small mistake, burning a pot of stew badly enough to ruin it. She braced herself, the old habit still strong in her, expecting to be shouted at the way she had once shouted at others. Ankairu only looked at the ruined pot, and then at her. "It happens," Ankiru said simply. "Start again. There is time." Nina stared at her for a long moment, as though she did not quite know what to do with kindness she had never once offered in return. Then she nodded, and started again, and said nothing more about it. But something in her shoulders looked a little lighter after that, for the rest of the evening, and Siaru never sent her away. She had thought about it many times, in the early days, but something in her, some quiet, stubborn kindness that Nena herself had never once managed to beat out of her, would not let her do it. "I know what it feels like to be unseen," she told Ada once. "I will not do that to anyone, not even her." Prince Dyke still ate in that kitchen sometimes, though everyone in the palace understood, by then, why he really came. He proposed to her there, in fact, in the exact spot where he had first tasted her cooking and stopped eating mid-bite. He said it felt right to ask her somewhere real, somewhere that smelled of smoke and spice, instead of perfume and polished floors. He had brought an orange with him, too, the same kind he had once given her, tied with a small ribbon around the ring itself. She laughed so hard at that, through happy tears, that she nearly dropped it into the cooking fire. She said yes, before he had even finished the whole question. They were married that spring, in the palace courtyard, in front of everyone who had once walked past Enkiru without a single glance, servants and nobles alike, all of them now watching the girl who used to scrub their pots stand at the very center of everything. The old guard, Chuka, who had remembered the running nurse that terrible night, stood near the back, quietly proud, telling anyone nearby that he had always known there was something the palace had gotten wrong. All those years, the old midwife Amaka stood at the front of that crowd, crying happy tears through the whole ceremony, because she had waited 18 years for exactly this moment, and had never once stopped believing it would come. The king held her hand through most of it, the two of them united, finally, in a hope that it turned out to be true. "And the apron?" Nairu kept carefully, and hung in her own room, where she could see it every morning when she woke. Sometimes, visitors to the palace would ask her why a princess would keep something so plain, so faded, so worn. She always gave them the same answer. "Because everyone in this palace looked at that apron for 18 years, she would say, and not one of them ever thought to look closely enough to see what was really there. I never want to forget what that feels like, and I never want anyone in my kingdom to feel that way again." There was one more visit Enkidu made that first year, one she told almost no one about beforehand. She rode, quietly, with only Ada and 2 guards, to the small orphan house near the market where she had spent her earliest years before Nina ever brought her to the palace. The woman who ran it now had been only a young helper back then, and did not recognize the well-dressed visitor at first. "I lived here once," Nairu told her gently, "a very long time ago. I do not remember much of it. I only wanted to see it again." The woman's eyes went wide when she finally understood who stood before her. She began to apologize for the state of the place, for the small rooms, for the little they had to offer any child who came through that door. Enkiru only shook her head. "Do not apologize," she said. "I would like to help, if you will let me." From that year onward, the orphan house never wanted for food again. Every child who passed through it, Enkiru made certain, learned to read a little, and eat well, and know that someone in that kingdom was watching out for them, even if that someone wore a crown. Ada's own life changed in quieter ways that year, though no less deeply. She married a palace guard the following spring, a kind, steady man who had watched her stand up bravely to the chief cook that first terrible night, and had thought, from that moment on, that he had never seen anything quite so fine. Enkiru gave them, as a wedding gift, a small house near the palace gate, and never once let Ada thank her properly for it, insisting always that the debt ran the other way entirely. Even Lady Chidainma, in time, came to speak to Enkiru without the sharp edge she had once carried. She never quite apologized outright. Pride does not often bend that far, but she began, slowly, to defend Enkiru's name whenever old gossip resurfaced among the nobles. And that, everyone agreed, was as close to sorry as Lady Chidinma ever came for anyone. Chuka, the old guard, was given a place of honor at the palace gate for the rest of his working years. A small plaque bearing his name mounted beside his post, so that every visitor who passed through would know that a simple guard's memory had once helped bring a lost princess home. Years passed after that, the way years always do, quietly and quickly at the same time. Enkiru and Daik had 3 children of their own. Every single one of them, as soon as they were old enough to hold a spoon, spent time in that same palace kitchen, learning to cook the way their mother had taught herself, alone, with nothing but patience and a hot fire. She wanted them to know, always, exactly where real value came from. Not from a title, but from the work of 2 honest hands. The old king lived to see his first grandchild born, and he held that small, warm bundle the same way he had once held his daughter's hand for the very first time, as though he still could not quite believe his own good fortune. He died peacefully, many years later, with Enkiru at his side, and his last words, those who were present always said, were simply, "I found her. I finally found her." Amaka lived a long life too, long enough to grow entirely too spoiled by a princess who never once stopped visiting her small room, every single week, for the rest of the old midwife's days. When Amaka finally passed, it was Naihiru who sat with her at the end, holding the same hands that had once held her, brand new, on the very worst night of both their lives. Nina never became a warm woman. Not truly, not even after everything, but she stayed at that kitchen for the rest of her working years, quiet and humbled, and in her own way, in the only way she seemed to know how, she came to care for the girl she had once claimed as nothing more than a servant. When Sediet, old and tired, Enkiru made certain she was buried with dignity, in a plot near the palace wall, because even a hard woman, Enkiru had come to believe, deserved that much kindness at the end. At the small burial, only a handful of people came. Enkiru was one of them. She stood quietly at the graveside, and though she could not honestly say she had ever loved the woman, she found she was glad, in the end, that she had not let anger have the final word between them. The elders of that palace still tell this story to children to this day, and they always end it the same way. A crown does not make a person worth seeing. A person is worth seeing long before anyone puts a crown on them. You simply have to be willing to look closely enough to notice. Thank you for joining us for this story. Subscribe to Untold African Folktale Stories and click the bell so you never miss a story. Watch our next story here.